Hello, everybody. I am Clare Beresford, your host and the CEO of Laurence Simons, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our episode of Summing Up, the Legal Podcast. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we provide fresh insights to help leaders in the legal industry prepare for and navigate the rapidly changing and evolving business landscape. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Clements, the General Counsel and Member of the Management Committee at the FTSE 100 Group, IAG, the International Airlines Group. Prior to joining IAG, Sarah was the Senior Vice President and Legal Head of Group Transformation and Separation at GSK. And during her time there, Sarah oversaw one of the biggest UK corporate demergers of the 21st century. The end product listing of Haleon was a whopping £28.5 billion. During her time at GSK, Sarah also oversaw the transatlantic joint venture between GSK and Pfizer, worth a mere £9.5 billion. In roles prior to AIG and GSK, Sarah was the Vice President of Legal International for Alexion Pharmaceuticals Inc., the Head of Legal AMAC for Novartis, and the Compliance Director at Schering-Plough. In 2023, Sarah was named by the lawyer as one of the members of the Lawyer Hot 100, and she is also the recipient of the 2020 WeQual Award for Legal Governance and Risk category. Sarah, that's quite the list of achievements, and to have overseen one merger of the size of Complexity is incredible, let alone two, and we're so pleased to have you with us here today. Thank you so much, and welcome to Summing Up.
Well, thank you, Claire. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We always start at the beginning, Sarah, because everybody has a thread. Everybody, gets to where they are today because of that thread. And so I was wondering where home was for you growing up, and if you can tell us a little bit about your sort of early start.
Yeah, so I moved around a lot when I was growing up. I was lucky to sort of be, my father worked for a multinational. So I sort of had a bit of an international background. I moved to Switzerland when I was 8 and lived there for 2 years in Geneva, went to the international school there. And then we were my father was posted to the US. And I lived there for 3 years and then came back to Geneva. And then unfortunately my parents got divorced, so I moved back to the UK with my mother around about the age of 13, but my father lived and died in Switzerland, so I seemed to have a connection into Switzerland and ended up living there myself. I think that had an influence on me as I was growing up. So for a while the home was just wherever my parents were. So.
And were you always the at school? Were you the academic child? Did you always enjoy studying? What we're always interested in. Sometimes we have aspiring lawyers who are watching this podcast, and we want to sort of tell them there's many different routes into the profession. There's many ways that you can start. Was there a particular memory or a catalyst for you that was about exploring the law?
So I guess I was one of the more academic person. I definitely wasn't sporty. I've sort of developed that a little bit later in life, actually. But so I didn't really have a clear idea of what to do with it. I read history at university, not really thinking very deeply about what I wanted to do. And it wasn't till I was sort of in my second year at university that I started to think about, okay, what should I do after this? And well, history is a fine degree. It's not really training you for anything. So you have to think about it and what would your skill sets match up with. And I wish I could say I really loved it, but I think it was, again, not very sophisticated. My teachers said, "Oh, I think you should do history. You'd be good at it." And so I thought, okay. I didn't think about it as deeply, perhaps, as I should have done. I enjoyed it, so I don't regret doing it. But I do wonder if maybe it would have been certainly easier starting out doing law, because you end up having to make decisions about, a career that you want to go into before you've had any real legal experience. You do a bit of work experience. So, and I started doing work experience, but it was family law firms, and that's what I thought I wanted to be. I thought I wanted to be a divorce lawyer, and so I did the CPE. Not sure what it's called now, but the law conversion course, and then took solicitors exams and started out training in a high street firm, which I don't regret, by the way. I learned a lot there, but I soon discovered that I really didn't want to be a divorce lawyer. It really wasn't for me, and I'd somehow written off commercial legal work as being far too. I wasn't clever enough. I didn't think I'd be clever enough. I didn't think I'd be good at it. I had no exposure to it. And actually found when I was doing my training contract that was the thing I enjoyed the most. And I sort of surprised myself. So I think in a way I self-limited. And I do wonder what, if things would have been, a little bit different or a little bit easier if I started out with law and been a bit more thoughtful about it. But that said, yeah, I got there in the end.
There's always that there's a pivot, isn't there, that it's like one makes an assumption about, I want to do family, that's where I find it, and then something else comes along. I mean, I think that's why you have the seats that you can have in terms of training contracts and be exposed to other practice areas. You had that brief stint in private practice, but the bulk of your career really has been in-house. What attracted you to that? Why was there a move to in-house?
I think it's because I when I qualified as a solicitor, I qualified into company commercial cocoa law, as it was called then. I don't think it's called that anymore. And I looked at the partners. I didn't see very many female partners, I must say, at the time. It was it had quite a macho environment. And I looked at it and I thought, I just actually don't see myself doing this. And it seemed like you kind of became very narrow. And I felt, in industry, you work in house, you get exposure to all kinds of things. A company is a living, breathing entity, and that. So you have employment law, you have corporate law, you have, IP, the whole thing, whatever the company is, doing, and you're part of that. And so my first in-house position was with a company called DuPont, which at the time was what still is quite big, a huge American company. It was primarily chemicals, but also had a life sciences group division, and it was part of an oil company at that stage, or had an oil company in its group structure, and it was really interesting. And I think I did actually briefly go back into private practice, which is slightly unusual, but realized that I missed being in-house. It's a very different skill set, different set of capabilities that you build up, but also for me, career-wise, much more satisfying.
It's interesting you mentioned there just about that you felt it was a little bit I think the word you used was macho in terms of the private practice sort of experience that you had at one point of your career. And we see that at Laurence Simons when we're having conversations with, future lawyers or aspiring lawyers, that they might not necessarily see themselves reflected in the leadership of the profession or the leadership of organisations. What advice would you share with those young people, and did you receive any sort of similar advice along your career journey?
I mean, I'd say, first of all, don't give up. I think one of the key things is I sort of underestimated myself. I just assumed, oh, that's just not for me. I'm not clever enough, or I'm not good enough. So I suppose there's a self-confidence piece where you need to sort of push yourself on a bit. But I think it's not helped if you don't see anyone like you in that role. So that you don't think that's a possibility for you because you don't see anyone else, and it sort of reinforces that this isn't for me kind of thinking. But when I moved to DuPont, was very lucky there were quite a lot of senior females in the organisation, both in the business and in the legal function. So that was, I think, a lot healthier environment. And I was lucky enough to meet a mentor there called Christina Ackerman, and now she's done amazing things in her career and has been a GC, and we both ended up working at Novartis as well. There's sort of the DuPont connection that brought us to Novartis. And she's been a great mentor to me. But I think it's when you kind of see somebody in that role and you think, oh, maybe I could do it. Why not me? So I think that really does help.
Definitely, we know that mentorship and I call it, it's equally important, cousin sponsorship, that they're vital in terms of navigating that career path and enabling people to aspire to things perhaps that you said that sometimes one doesn't think of oneself in a role because there isn't anybody that's doing it, or there's some doubt there. If I may, I just want to touch on something also that's sort of interest to our readership, viewership, listenership, which is Bloomberg recently published some pretty startling data actually around pay disparity between men and women in the legal profession, and sort of even in the sort of the higher levels. And I don't want any confidential information. I don't want you to disclose anything, of course. But have you had, or do you know of any examples where that you've faced either gender discrimination or that you've had to perhaps navigate something as a general counsel that has felt unfair, if I can put it that way?
I mean, certainly earlier on in my career, it was. And thankfully, I think things are much different, actually. But I don't know so much about pay disparity because you didn't have visibility into any of that. You just kind of assumed that people were treating you fairly. It was more, particularly in a law firm environment. Women never talked about having children. It was felt like that was an absolute taboo subject. And the minute somebody did go, become, pregnant, there was this assumption that they wouldn't necessarily be coming back, or they'd somehow been disloyal. And it's kind of crazy. You were like, what is this? So we this is part of life. So I've seen that, and I've seen, unfortunately, very good female lawyers actually giving up a career because they couldn't make it work. I think there's a lot more flexibility now. Law firms particularly have reviewed how they do things, but still a lack of female representation in partnerships. I think it's getting better, but there's still room for improvement. But I think definitely when I started out, it was quite difficult. And this whole, now there's a drive for authenticity and bringing your whole self into the office. You didn't talk about your, having children. You kind of, well, at least I didn't. I felt, very nervous about it, it sounds crazy, but that was certainly how I felt, and probably I don't think I was alone in that. I must admit I haven't had to face anything directly as a GC. It's something that we keep monitor very closely. So things like pay gap, and looking at opportunities for women in the organisation. And in pharma, it's I think that it does tend to attract more female talent. This industry that I'm now in does attract female talent, but it's slightly different. I mean, I guess pilots are predominantly male. We have quite a good representation in management, but we need more pilots. So any aspiring female pilots out there, just let us know. So
it's interesting. Much of your career has been spent in the pharmaceutical industry, which obviously you knew like the back of your hand. You've had extraordinary experience there, but you've had a recent career move. What was the change to the airlines and aviation sector like? How did it feel? Were the challenges that you had to overcome? What did that look like for you, Sarah?
It felt like starting all over again in a way, because you know, having spent nearly 20 years in life sciences and pharma, um, you know, you've sort of become steeped in it, and so then you really are trying to learn something completely different. And I'm still learning, actually. And the acronyms alone, you know, you sort of there's a lot of jargon that's used, whether it's in pharma or I think every industry's got its own jargon. So I've had to learn that understand finances and you know, how it works in aviation. It's obviously very different to pharma. And so it's just learning the new business, learning the jargon, meeting the people, building out your networks, and that is like starting all over again. That on top of a completely different role. So the GC role is totally different. I've done a lot of different roles throughout my career, and each time you learn more. But then GC sort of brings it all together. But there's things that you just never had visibility of. When you're operating at kind of the level below, you might have little snippets, and certainly Haleon gave me a good insight into that the Haleon demerger. But yeah, so it's a twofold thing. So not only completely different industry, but a completely different role. So I really do feel like I'm learning, but you just have to ask lots of questions, not beat yourself up too much if you're feeling a bit sometimes. Oh, I don't really understand that. And learn that it comes, and there are some things where you bring a new perspective, which is good. Actually, it brings a bit of re-energizes everyone. I think I feel re-energized, and I think it injects a different perspective into the organisation. So.
Well, the re-energization, I suppose, was vital because in your very recent past, you achieved one of the most amazing feats of sort of the 21st century in terms of the demerger that you were leading, and that's a massive scale. I mean, I think just to sort of put that into perspective, it's one of the biggest corporate demergers that we've had in the 21st century. When Haleon was created from GSK, if you can talk us through sort of what that process was, because I don't know if anybody's going to be having demergers, but what tends to happen when you're coming to where we are in the economic cycle, that spin-offs happen, right? As companies try to refocus on core products, or so that sort of it's acquisitive for one maybe, or it may be that it's a standalone sell-off. What's your experience been like? How was it?
I mean, it's extraordinarily complex, I have to say. I think, and demergers, because there aren't many of them that happen, it's not as well established playbook as you know, as if you were divesting it and it was being sold to another company for it to integrate into its own business. And so, you have to be able to stand up an organization so that it can meet the requirements of being an independent listed company on well, in this case it was two stock exchanges. It's the London and New York, and also the company that the parent company that's demerged also is not the same afterwards. It needs to be reshaped and right sized. So it's enormously complex. So whereas with a sale of a business to another company, you don't really worry about it's up to the company to integrate it into their own structure. You don't really have to think too much about that. Here you're actually separate, standing up two separate companies, and you've got armies of people sort of doing due diligence on both, actually making sure that they meet the standards that are needed. And it was enormously complex. So you have not just the structural separation, which obviously you've got the finest corporate brains in in across the world, sort of working out how to do that from a corporate law and capital markets perspective. You have also operational separation, which is, in a global business that's operating across many different countries. You're suddenly having to, separate out these things that have been, brought together, all the synergies that you've created when the company is part of a group. You're suddenly separating out, and so manufacturing sites, all of that stuff, you've got to do it. It's enormously detailed, enormously bitty, and in this case, we also had a joint venture partner, so that made it much more unusual as well. So satisfying the requirements of both companies, I'd say it was a real test of resilience and trying to keep all the balls up in the air at the same time.
It's interesting because resilience is something we've spoken about a lot at Laurence Simons, and it seems to be a key ingredient in leadership and lawyers, right? Even at the junior end of their career, we firmly believe that it's not something you're born with. It's a muscle that you learn to sort of exercise, and the more that you exercise it, the more depths of resilience that you're able to sort of come up with. Was that your experience when you were going through that demerger process?
Yeah, I mean, it really does. It really does test you, and I think it's almost like running a marathon. Really, you've got to pace yourself, otherwise you kind of burn out. You have to look after yourself. So this is a physical and mental well-being. We also did this during a pandemic as well. So we were doing something that nobody had really ever done before, but we're also doing it in our homes, so, which made it, slightly unusual. And I found that, I had to make sure that I was looking after myself physically as well as mentally. I think that's really important. It's that, I think that luckily these days people talk about it more, whereas I think as I was starting out in my legal career, it was seen as a sign of weakness if you admitted that you were finding things tough, or you were feeling stressed, or whatever. So certainly resilience. It was both physically and mentally quite a challenge, and I was having to bounce back when you'd had a bad day or something unexpected had happened. It really was a good test. But also, I think the need to do other things, your physical well-being as well. So I think when you start out in your career, you perhaps can abuse your body in ways that, so the lack of sleep and that kind of thing, and you can't do that as you get older. You shouldn't really do it when you're younger, but and so you have to pace yourself. You have to make sure that you're getting the right amount of exercise. Don't take that for granted. You've got to look after your health. So.
Touching on mergers, demergers, that whole piece. The Harvard Business Review, we don't have any stats for it sort of post-pandemic, but before the pandemic, there was a statistic that they published that between 70 and 90% of mergers actually fail. And one of the things that they identified was that it was the need for communication. There was need for more communication between parties and sort of unrealistic expectations. And you have led multiple mergers, and we've just touched on the demerger, which has meant that you've had to lead diverse teams from your organisation. You've had to manage the law firms that you were working with, and purchasing organisations or joint ventures, as you were speaking to. What's one piece of advice that you could give to our viewers about leading and working with stakeholders outside of your in-house team to ensure success, as well as your actual team?
I think so. Certainly if it comes to law firms, obviously select well, select the ones that are both technically excellent, but also understand and know your business and get it. Spend a lot of time, explaining it, scoping out almost like a project plan, the retainer to sort of try and avoid surprises, although, recognizing that things happen, or, sometimes you don't know the full scale of a project from the outset. So, but building regular communication and updates, regular weekly updates, and if you've got multiple firms working on it, you have them join in together. They may not like doing that, but but it's important that there's clear communication and everyone understands, what's going on across the board, so that it's properly coordinated. And in terms of leading an internal diverse team, I think it's, playing to the strengths of the people on that team, recognizing different working styles. How do you really get the best out of people? And then, of course, we work very closely with all the different cross-functional groups. And so, again, it's all about those personal connections that you build up, and really seeking to understand, what they're trying to achieve and where the challenges are, and how you fit alongside that. So, communication is the key. Yeah, and I've heard that figure about the majority of M&A deals fail. I think some of that can be cultural as well. And I think, I don't know, maybe they weren't that great a deal to begin with. I don't. You kind of wonder. Lawyers can't make a good deal. Can't make a bad deal a good deal. Even the most brilliant legal minds can't do that if the deal is fundamentally not very good. But they can also make a good deal bad if they don't really understand what they need to achieve. The contracts aren't drafted appropriately, or they're just not getting it and being obstructive.
Sarah, we spoke earlier about your recent change of sectors, but both sectors have been regulated, and as such, as regulated sectors, then compliance comes into play quite a lot. And what's interesting is that we're seeing in our world, companies are kind of moved from sort of corporate social responsibility sort of into that ESG space. Sort of, it's taking time at boards. I'm sure you'll have discussions about this ad infinitum at your board, but we know that last year in the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority published its new environmental sustainability strategy, which was outlining and addressing environmental performance in aviation. I would imagine moving from one regulated industry to another regulated industry, but potentially with a different set of problems and issues and challenges, is quite the learning curve. So what's that been like for you when you were starting at IAG? And again, is there any advice that you could share with our viewership in how you invest and build out those ESG strategies?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, this is an area that's developing, and people, there's all kinds of different angles to it. And very important. So there's obviously there's the E part, the environmental piece, which obviously when you work in the aviation industry and we're talking about carbon emissions, that's a challenging discussion to have, and how you greenwashing obviously is something that's a great concern to society and investors and a number of all different stakeholders. There's the S piece, the societal piece, so the employee piece, and then G, governance. So bringing all these things together, and so it cuts, comes across in a number of different ways. So you've got what is the company saying on these things? What do you? What's the governance? What is your disclosure? How do you report it? It's sort of these different metrics. It's not strictly financial in the same way as other, the company results are, but extremely important. It's something that's very scrutinized. So I needed to kind of get to understand it better. And I guess one of the things that attracted me to this role was the chance to actually try and do something about it. I think IAG is the first airline to commit to achieving net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. We've also made commitments around sustainable aviation fuel and by 2030, and we're investing in new technologies. So it's a thing that we need to, as a business and as a part of this environment, we need to be able to do that. And I'm that's one of the things that attracted me to the role. It's the opportunity to try and work through changes. But it is a tough one. But it covers different things. So I was thinking, do we have somebody on point purely for sustainability within the legal function? Because we have a team here, and there's a sustainability team, but it covers so many things. It covers the interactions you have with suppliers and the commitments that they have. It includes, trying to procure sustainable aviation fuel, different aircraft, looking at new technologies like hydrogen-powered aircraft as well. So you've got basics of different contracting expertise required. You've also got the sort of the disclosure piece. What are we saying? The corporate governance elements and company secretarial around all that. Competition law regulators are sort of trying to. Often competition law is policies used to sort of promote certain behaviours. That's also a piece. What do you say in your advertising and promotional materials, which feels a bit like pharma actually in some ways, adopting that kind of disciplined approach to what we say, engaging with government policymakers and regulators. It covers a whole range of different activities. So I think it's where I've been encouraging my team to take an interest, not just more than take an interest, but develop expertise in this area, because we need to do it. But also the other pieces as well, the employee pieces, expectations around modern slavery and other topics that we report on.
It's definitely an evolution, isn't it? And it's moving at quite a pace. And there's as you said, there's so many areas upon which it touches, which leads me to my next question, which is the sort of the raging debate that lawyers are currently having about machine learning or artificial intelligence, and should you use it? Do you use it? How does that play for junior lawyers? What are the compliance issues that sort of sit around that companies are wrestling with? Because now what we're seeing is companies going to their legal team to say, we think we want to use this tool because it's going to solve a problem, or it's going to allow us to develop a better product, or allow us to, service our customers more effectively. Legal teams are sort of navigating that and wanting to understand how they mitigate risk, how they look at compliance. Do you have any thoughts on this, or any advice that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think I'm still still sort of looking to see where this is all going to go. I see it more as an enabler than a threat. I can remember, this is going to make me sound like an old dinosaur, but when people first started emailing things to each other, I remember everyone getting very excited about that, and whether or not the fact that somebody could amend a contract, on the other side of it, it was treated with a lot of suspicion. But I think it could actually make jobs easier. I think it's here. We're going to end up. Everyone's going to be using this technology. I think we need to make sure that it's being used safely. That there's a tendency to think, oh, let's try out Chat GPT, but you don't want to put anything confidential on there, because that's going to then just go out and it's no longer confidential. So I think obviously every business needs to look at ways to make sure that it's they're protecting their IP. Also that it's reliable. There's been some question marks where it's been used and it hasn't been the source of all knowledge that people think. but I do see it as an enabler. I still think the role of the lawyer isn't just batting out contracts and other things. There's discussions and interactions that you need to have with, like on the demerger. I don't see that we could have just done that using AI. You need that human interaction, and the lawyers, good lawyers should be playing a key role in all of that. But yeah, let's see. I think everyone is waiting to see what's happening. I know that law firms use, obviously, AI, have been using it for some time in due diligence and certain other activities. Hopefully it will enrich lawyers' roles rather than threatening them.
We firmly believe in enrichment. It's our purpose at Laurence Simons. It's wonderful you've used that word, because I agree with you. I think there's something around not having the fear around it, but seeing, okay, as long as we've looked, it's what you said earlier, Sarah, about, you've got to think of all of the unknown unknowns, right? Let's really put a proper plan of this together, and let's really take some time to think about, okay, and what would the consequence of that be, and then from a legal perspective, how are we ensuring that the business isn't at risk? So yeah, it's a fascinating topic. So you're now firmly at IAG, and you're doing wonderful work there. Are you able to share anything that's sort of exciting on your horizon in terms of any projects that are underway? Or I don't want to obviously anything that's not for public knowledge, but what's next for you?
What's next? Well, I think it's, again, continuing to learn more, get myself established in the role, because I've only joined sort of 9 months ago, and there's still quite a lot to learn. And so there's that. We've got some exciting projects, like we've got M&A, which we signed a deal in February, and that's now going through the competition law process. And again, different to pharma, it's a different way of looking at it than the metrics that we used in pharma. So I'm learning a lot about that, and that's very exciting. I think the business itself is coming out of a really difficult time with the pandemic. The aviation business was really, took a battering, because all of a sudden you couldn't fly anywhere, and all your costs are there, but you're not bringing in any money at all. So all the airlines are coming out of that now, and how do we manage a sustainable business, going forward? And so I'm being part of that, and part of the management discussions around that, which is very exciting. And I think it's I think any regulated industries is a really interesting business to be an in-house lawyer there, because there's so many different parts of that you, and an international one as well. I think that's it's great. I think it's I just continue to learn every day, and I think that's that keeps us all energized.
We always end our podcast with the same question, Sarah. So first of all, well, thank you so much for your time today. But what's the one thing you can't live without?
Well, I suppose it was my husband. Obviously, is not a thing. And if it's just something more frivolous, I think it's Cadbury's dairy milk. When I'm feeling down, that makes me feel much better.
Sarah, thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm sure that our viewership and listenership will equally take some great information from this. Thank you.